All right, Facebook, and looks like we're over on YouTube as well. Boy, Jay Shipes, first through the door. Nice job, Jay, being ready to go here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp here on this Thursday. I am glad to have you with us, and I think we're going to have some fun today. I saw where Bet Online had put out its odds to make the college football playoff, not to win the national championship. We'll obviously get into that, but just to make the playoff. And sometimes I think the odds and the projections in terms of who's going to make the playoff can be a little bit more instructive than who's going to win the national championship. Because when you think about getting into that Final Four and having to win semifinal game, national championship game, there is a degree of, I don't want to call it luck, but it just becomes a lot harder to project how these teams are going to fare once they start playing each other. Whereas when you talk about making it through your division, getting to a conference championship game, winning that conference championship game, and then just getting into the Final Four, sometimes making projections like that can be a little easier to do and sometimes a little bit more interesting. From that standpoint, I think we're going to have some fun doing some of that kind of stuff today. Mo Morris checking in from San Diego. Good to have you here. Richard Holton here as well. Robert Reynolds says the beard game's on point. I appreciate that. I guess I'm semi-okay with it. I feel like some of the whiskers are growing a little longer. I almost wish it was just a little bit fuller, but I appreciate that, Robert. Thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. As I said before, Jay Shipes checking in as well. One thing I will tell you is today, and I hate to do this, we're going to really try not to do this very much, but I do have a little bit of a personal thing I got to take care of today. So around 10:30 or so, I'm going to have to hop off. We'll do 30 strong minutes, and then after that, I got to hop off to get everything else ready. And like I said, I apologize. We'll try to make it up, maybe a little extra time tomorrow. We want to make sure that we're here for you for the full hour as much as we possibly can. But today, I am going to have to hop off a little bit early today. Mike Weeks checking in from Alabama. Good to have you here. Leslie Smith Lothers checking in from Jacksonville. Leslie, I hope I pronounced your last name correctly. And I can't wait, by the way, to see all y'all down there in Jacksonville for the cocktail party. Robert Reynolds said, did you see Gurley's hype video? I really did. The Falcons are doing, and there has not been a lot of time when I've said this. In fact, there have been many times when our comment section, when it's veered in the direction of the NFL, have mostly had pretty nasty things to say about the Falcons, for a multitude of reasons. Their hype of the Gurley acquisition has been brilliant and very well executed. And the hype video stuff, the fact that he's coming home and all the stuff they're doing, right now they are being very smart on social media. And I do like to see that. I do. Brandon Willis says you can't lose a game because it hurts us in the back end. And Brandon's obviously probably right about that. And for those of you that are just kind of getting in, I know a lot of you are kind of, hopping in here as we move on. One of the things I said we're going to talk about today are Georgia's chances of making the college football playoff. I've got 5 things about Georgia's playoff odds that I think you need to know. We'll get into that. But one of the things that Brandon brings up that's just really important is when you really lose any game, and it's hard to go undefeated. Most teams don't. I mean, think about the history of the college football playoff and how few undefeated teams have really emerged there. Losses are typically a part of the equation for almost any team that makes the college football playoff. But Brandon's point, it's still a good one. And I'm assuming this is not the former Ole Miss middle linebacker, Brandon Willis, that played with the San Francisco 49ers. But nonetheless, when you lose a game, what Georgia did to South Carolina this past year, the way that Georgia did to LSU back in 2018, when you drop that regular season game, you really, even though you say, well, we still control our own destiny, we can win the conference, blah, 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 there is still a lot of other ways you can make the college football playoff. When you lose that game, you do lose a degree of your, ability to argue and your ability to kind of make a case for yourself there at that point in time. Jay Shipe says, lose early if you're going to lose. I apologize for setting a bad example and rubbing my eye. Mike D says the slick comb over. It's not a comb over. I think y'all have just kind of forgotten what I look like when I comb my hair. I did comb my hair this morning, so I think a lot of y'all have just kind of forgotten what I look like when I halfway get dressed. Some of y'all have been body shaming me for wearing more casual clothes and things like that. So I thought I had better put on some real clothes or something today, just because some of y'all have been giving me a hard time, which I probably deserve. Mickey Brady checking in from Pearson, Georgia, grading those roads. Mickey, thanks for checking in. I hope you're staying safe, and thanks for doing hard work for us out there in the community. Jay Shipes also says he thought that Laquan Treadwell was a good pickup by the Falcons. Yeah, the former Ole Miss receiver. A lot of SEC names being brought in by UGA right now. Sorry, Freudian slip, by the Falcons right now. So not too bad. Andrew Hughes, thanks for the kind words on the beard. I appreciate that. James Moore still working on that drywall. Good to see that, James. One of the things I take a real source of pride in is that so many of the people that watch this show are doing work like that matters, right? I mean, giving somebody a place to live, that requires drywall, right? And that's real work. There's been a phrase out there lately about, what is essential work? Well, building homes, that's essential work. You have to have a place to live. Building roads, as Mickey said he was doing, that's essential work. That's something we have to have. Otherwise, ambulances can't get to where they need to go. And we've certainly learned a lot more about how important that is. I have a lot of truck drivers that listen into us, a lot of service personnel. Talked to a guy this week on social media that's impacted right now by and I don't fully know all this, but I think there's a 90-day kind of embargo on our service personnel coming back into the country right now. He's impacted by that. There is nothing that I take as a greater source of pride than all the people that watch the show, or in the podcast case, listen to the show, radio show wise, listen to the show. We're out there doing that, essential work, important pillars of our community, drywall guys, road graders, truck drivers, things like that. That is a unbelievable source of pride for me. Unbelievable source of pride. Yeah, I mean, Heath Hatcher, another example of that, working to keep the water and sanitation systems running here in Nashville. Yeah, imagine being cooped up in your home and not having that running water, not having that plumbing to help you out there. I mean, it'd be hard to imagine that not being the case. Andrew Hughes says pest control still rolling. Andrew, you stay safe out there and keep those termites away. As everybody says in Georgia, there's two kinds of houses: those that have had termites and those that will have them. So you keep going out there and you keep taking that done. Bill Atchison says he's producing oil to keep gasoline in our vehicles. Got to have that. Green Soldier says this, and by the way, Green Soldier is definitely one of those. He says essential personnel are the unsung heroes out there. It really is, and in some cases, I think it's invisible, right? I've said this before on this show and on Twitter. I'm semi-ashamed of what I've taken for granted, kind of going back to where the world was a few weeks ago. And a lot of that, what you call essential work, I never really thought about walking into Kroger and grabbing a carton of milk, which my kids drink like, oh my gosh, they just drink it by the gallon, every couple of days, it would seem like. But you never really spend a lot of time, at least I haven't, spent a lot of time thinking about how something like that gets into the store. Obviously now, because of what we're dealing with, you're forced to think about that a little bit more, and you obviously, have to consider the fact that this is getting there because of truckers. This is getting there because of people who do that kind of stuff, and the truckers can get there because of the roads that are paved, and on you go, of all that invisible work that gets done that I've just not done a good job of paying attention to, that essential work, as we've been saying. I hope that when all of this is done, I hope that one of the long-term changes that I'm able to make is just taking this kind of stuff more seriously and taking the time to really be grateful for all the ways in which little things connected together form our society. Laura Woodard checking in from Woodstock. Laura, good to have you here. Robert Hosea says, keep the beard, inspiring me. So, my wife is kind of coming around on it a little bit. She likes it a little bit better, it would seem. So there's a chance, I guess, it can stay for a while. At one point in time, it was kind of workshop that maybe we'd call this the Beat Bama beard, and I would keep this until Georgia beats Alabama in September. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that or not. I don't love having it as much as I love having it to talk to y'all about, to be completely honest with you. Yeah, so that's kind of my thing on that. Memphis Dog talking about living in Brunswick. Boy, Brunswick's one of my favorite places in Georgia. I love that coastal Georgia area. I love St. Mary's. I just love that whole area down there. Amazing. What a great place to live that must be. Jerry Popham checking in, the Kennesaw Kid. I love to see that. Keith Fold's going to be sharing his 5 things it takes to win a national championship. Mike Mazzell, thanks for the kind words. Shane Guy says, here's some other, essential work that you just got to have: HVAC, plumbing, electrical. We talked a lot about the fact that it's going to get a lot warmer this weekend. It means being cooped up in the house, man. You need that air conditioning to be working. Pete Ellis checking in from Flowery Branch. that's my old stomping grounds. I went to Johnson High School, so I spent a lot of time in Flowery Branch, and really kind of still do for the most part. I got a lot of friends and family that kind of live in that area still. By the way, Jamie Kennedy is pushing the Bama beatdown beard. He says he's missing all the guests on the show. Yeah, so connecting you guys with the guests right now is not a super easy thing to do, but I will remind you, if it's not too much trouble, if you've got the time to do this, Jamie, we're still doing the podcast every single day, and that's pretty well the show as you've come to expect it, right? That's Jeff Sintel. I did an interview this morning with Mike Griffith that'll be a part of today's episode of DawgNation Daily presented by Meriwether and Tharp. So if you've got the time to both watch the video and then check in on the podcast. Now, I haven't talked to Mike Johnson in a couple of weeks, but he was with us a couple of weeks ago, and I loved that, talk about Scott Cochran. However, we have had a guest on the podcast every single day. Good stuff from Jeff Sintel this week. I thought Connor Riley was terrific yesterday. Mike Griffith coming up today. So we do have a lot of that going on and going down. Rodney Smith, by the way, speaking of that essential work, saying, hey, I'm up on a roof right now working on some AC and listening to you. Rodney, you be careful. You hold on up there. You hold on that roof up there for sure. Mike Little, I mentioned truck drivers. He says, I'm a truck driver for sure. So, Mike, thanks for checking in there and mentioned being in Louisiana. I know that Louisiana has had and Mike kind of brings this to our attention, has had a really rough go of it. So if you're, trying to pray specifically for the coronavirus impact right now, keep that state of Louisiana in your mind. It seems like that's kind of quickly emerging. I promise we're not talking about coronavirus the whole time, but that seems like it's kind of quickly emerging as one of those newer hotspots after the coastal states like Washington, California have been hit, New York, New Jersey seemingly hit really hard. It looks like Louisiana is quickly emerging as one of the newer hot spots there right here in SEC country. So keep them in your prayers for sure. Worm remembering Mike Johnson. It's kind of funny, I meet people all the time who are kind of late to the show, and I'm thankful we get new listeners and viewers all the time. And some of the people who kind of check in new here don't necessarily realize, just kind of basically what the show kind of used to be, right? We used to have Mike Johnson, former Alabama All-American, on the show each and every week. Always a lot of fun. We were able to catch up with him just a couple of weeks ago, and that was really fun. That was really nice. But that's kind of, that's kind of a thing that, we were used to do, haven't done as much lately, but Mike's just been super busy. But we did have him on the show a couple of weeks ago when Scott Cochran was first hired, and that was a fun conversation. You can go back and check that out in the DawgNation Daily archives. By the way, let me remind you that our show day is presented by our friends at Meriwether and Tharp. And, we've mentioned things to pray for right now. One of the things that a lot of you, by the way, huge thanks to my kids for making the graphic available for us here today. There's the Meriwether and Tharp graphic. One of the things that you can pray for as well, for a lot of the friends and family that who are kind of cooped up in their house right now, one of the things that makes that more difficult for a lot of people is the fact that they may be part of a strained relationship. And that may have been true before the coronavirus lockdown happened, before the social distancing campaign began. All of a sudden now dealing with that kind of puts them even more in that situation right now, which is really kind of a horrible thing to think about, horrible thing to deal with. But divorce is a fact of life for a lot of people. And so if you find yourself potentially going through that, my advice to you is check out my friends at Meriwether and Tharp. They are your source for Georgia divorce. You can find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. And listen, if you're early in this process, you're not quite sure what's going on, they offer a lot of free resources, podcast posts, blog posts, things along those lines, free initial consultation. You can kind of acquaint yourself with the process and even acquaint yourself with what you might be able to do to save your relationship, because if you can, you should. However, if you find yourself at the end of the rope there, and that's a terrible place to be, and as I said before, my prayers are with you. My advice to you is also make sure you have an advocate on your side. Meriwether and Tharp's been through this thousands of times. They can stand by you and help you rebuild your life and make yourself whole again. So find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com. All right, let me kind of roll through the odds here on Georgia for a moment. And for those of you who are just kind of getting with us, I said before, I'm going to have to hop off here after about 30 minutes. So we've already been on for about 17 minutes. We got about 15 good minutes left to go. Sorry for jumping off early today, but we got some stuff we got to take care of around here. So let me kind of get into the main content. I'm going to do more of this on today's podcast, so I hope that you'll check that out. But here are the 5 things I think you need to know about Georgia's chances of making the playoff, according to the odds recently posted by Bet Online. Now, let me kind of give you the disclaimer I typically give here. I know a lot of you, most of you probably even, won't ever make a bet on Georgia to win the national championship or make the college football playoff or anything like that. I completely understand that. My reason for sharing gambling odds is that it kind of represents a numerical projection of how the season might take place. And as I've said before, the reason why I listen to the gambling community on stuff like this is because they put their money where their mouth is. If they have wildly wrong predictions, wildly wrong projections, they stand to lose a lot of money for having been incorrect on that. So they have to put some time and resources into the odds that they post. They can't just spout hot takes like maybe I do. They have to be a little bit more deliberate about their process. So from that standpoint, here's what you need to know about Georgia. Right now, Georgia is plus 150 to make the college football playoff. That works out to be about 1.5 to 1 to make the playoffs. Better chance they don't than they do, but still pretty good odds. And what that puts Georgia is just behind Alabama as the second most likely team in the college football playoff to, I should say the second most likely team in the SEC to make the college football playoff. Now, my gosh, doesn't it seem like we've been in that same spot year after year after year? As much as I don't like giving credit to Alabama, as much as I don't want to give credit to Nick Saban, here's an area in which you do have to give him some credit. Saban has found a way to sort of maintain a certain standard for that Alabama program that has survived the years. And the way in which Georgia has built itself up recently in terms of generating more revenue, we're going to deal with that at some point this week, in terms of recruiting at an unprecedented clip. We've obviously covered that a lot over the last couple of years. In terms of the overall resources that have been marshaled at Georgia, the fact that after all of this, Georgia still sits in the mind of the preseason prognosticators as just slightly below Alabama in that preseason pecking order, it says something, I think, pretty impressive about where Alabama is right now. And you have to give them a degree of credit for all of that. So that's what makes that game in September so important. The fact that Georgia has a chance to, on the field, announce to the world, not just the betting public, but the world at large, that the order of things in the SEC has now been changed. And the work that Smart has been doing to build up the Georgia program, it has now fully come to fruition there in Tuscaloosa. I don't have to tell you how high the stakes are for that game, but that is literally what they are at the moment, and that is worth keeping in mind. Here's the second thing you need to know about Georgia's chance of making the college football playoff. According to Bet Online, Georgia's the fifth most likely team in the country to make the playoff. I mentioned Alabama before. You could probably guess at least two of the other three. Clemson, Ohio State are kind of right there in terms of chance of making the playoff. And then just slightly above Georgia, I mentioned that Georgia was at plus 150. Oklahoma stands at plus 125, so just ahead of Georgia. So that puts Georgia fifth most likely team to make the playoff, just behind Oklahoma, a decent amount ahead, or decent amount behind Clemson, Ohio State, and then, of course, Alabama there as well. Now, I've told you, I don't remember how much we did this in the video show the other day, but on the podcast version of our show, I did talk the other day about Oklahoma, not even in relationship to Georgia, but just looking at the Sooners, the fact that there is no high-profile transfer quarterback there for the first time in a while. Lincoln Riley's had great success using Jalen Hurts, who transferred from Alabama, Kyler Murray, who transferred from Texas A&M, Baker Mayfield, who began his college career at Texas Tech. For Oklahoma, this is going to be the first time in a while that the Sooners have a quarterback that is not someone that came from somewhere else. For the first time in a while, they're going to have to build up a homegrown talent. In addition to that, they really haven't gotten much better on defense. And as the Bear Chris Felica pointed out on Twitter the other day, they have also won a lot of close games last season. I think 7-1 in games decided by a touchdown or less. And that might sound like, ooh, they know how to close out. They know how to get it done. The truth is, over the course of years, those things have a way of kind of sort of evening themselves out. A lot of close wins one year typically begats some close losses the following year. So from that standpoint, I don't really view Oklahoma as more likely to make the playoff than Georgia this year. I think there's also some added skepticism baked into the cake with them on the basis of how bad they got beat last year after having also been throttled by Alabama the year before. There's a human element I think they have to contend with a bit there. Third thing to know about Georgia's chance to make the college football playoff, and then we'll get back to your comments here in a moment. There is a perceivable gap right now between Georgia and three of the other teams I just mentioned. Ohio State, Clemson, and Alabama. Ohio State, Clemson, Alabama. The betting community here at Bet Online views those three programs as more likely to make the playoff than not. Georgia, more likely to miss the playoff than make it. So there's a little bit of a gap in place between how Georgia is viewed near the top, but how the three prohibitive favorites are viewed, Alabama, Clemson and Ohio State. And in terms of preseason projections, you're probably not all that surprised to see that, not surprised to hear that. That's generally speaking where most of the national media has been thus far. The other thing I'll mention here is two more quick things, and I'll get back to your comments. I think it's interesting that when it comes to the betting public, they are once again reinforcing the point that we made. While you may have reporter guy or radio hot take guy or someone along those lines say, hey, watch out, this may be the year that Florida overtakes Georgia. For the most part, the betting public is just not really buying into that. There would seem to be a little bit of a mirage right now about Florida. I mentioned Georgia's odds to make the playoff are plus 150, puts them fifth best in the country. Florida, by comparison, a good bit down the pecking order. They're at plus 350, about 3.5 to 1 in terms of the chances of making that. A lot more in line with, like, say, what Texas A&M's chances are of winning the SEC West. That's about where Florida kind of finds itself right now. So for every, Feinbaum guest or, Orlando Sentinel columnist or whatever else that's going to really be pushing Florida on you right now, it's important to note that the betting community, whose objectives got no dog in the fight whatsoever, as of right now, they're not really buying into that too much. These odds making the college football playoff would seem to indicate that. And then the final thing here before I take some of your comments, Georgia is also, according to Bet Online, 9 to 1 to win the national championship. Somebody said on our comment section of the day, they bet this at a slightly smaller number, but 9 to 1 right now to win the national championship, according to the folks at Bet Online. So that is that. Let me hop in and get a few more of your comments here. Dennis Wilson says, self-quarantine, VA. What's up, buddy? Good to have you, Dennis. Hope you're staying safe and trolling people from afar for a change, but I'm glad you're here nonetheless. Worm talking about something, I'm not quite sure. Breda Pest Management kind of getting there, talking some shop with the pest control stuff. You'd love to be able to see that. Our buddy Matt Breda checking in. On the subject of Florida, Q says it's all up to our revamped offense to beat Florida. Our defense is solid. We have to produce big yards and score. Can't settle for field goals, especially without Rodrigo. I think that absolutely is true. And I do think the absence of Rodrigo Blankenship this year ought to change the way that Georgia approaches things a bit. I mean, sometimes, and I'm not saying I wouldn't still love to have Rodrigo Blankenship. Obviously, I would. But sometimes I think there's a case to be made that having a great kicker changes the way that you game plan. Sometimes I think it changes you for the worst. All of a sudden, when you've got almost a guaranteed 3 points, you kind of take your foot off the gas when you get in your field goal range because you want to make sure you at least get those 3. Whereas sometimes a little bit less dependable kicker might force you to go for touchdowns a bit more. And honestly, that's probably the way to play anyway. I think that's a good point. Christopher Wilson says, what do you think our kicking game will be like next year? I really don't know. I don't know. I think that kicking is one of those things that cannot be projected in high school. It's just so different, right? I mean, you've got stadium in the background when you're kicking in an SEC venue, whereas in almost every Friday night venue, you're kicking into the dark night. There's no pressure in high school the way that we kind of think of pressure in college because most of the high school games are not on TV. Every college game is. I just think it's a very difficult thing. And even though the kicking camps and things like that have gotten really good at evaluating the overall skill set, I think what happens between the ears for a kicker is even more important than the overall skill set. Not that the skills don't matter, they do, but the mental acuity, is acuity the right word? Maybe it's not. But just having the proper mental makeup to handle that pressure is what's really important there. And from that standpoint, it's just hard to measure that before you get into a game and do so. So I think that's fair. Happy birthday to Ezra, by the way, in our YouTube comment section. Crow King 123 asked about Mason Smith, the big defensive lineman. Says looks like Jordan Davis. Yeah, I mean that's another one of those guys that seems to be making some noise here as of late. He says pulling him from Louisiana is going to be hard. It's definitely going to be a name worth considering. It's definitely going to be a name worth paying attention to. So that's one of those things that when you're thinking about those early names to know for the 2021 class, Mason Smith, big defensive lineman, is clearly one of those for sure. Frank Patterson says rumors of adding spring practice early July would definitely help freshmen get acclimated better, especially a certain left tackle that could start. That's a really good point. We mentioned this yesterday that in some respects, the absence of spring practice is a little bit of a detriment to the guys, the incoming freshmen who could have gone through it in terms of their ability to compete for early playing time. But if you do kind of, supplement the typical summer practice with a little bit of earlier. I think it's been described by Ross Bjork, the Texas A&M AD, as a possible, like almost like NFL style mini camp for those incoming freshmen not lucky enough to be here for the early enrollment time. That'd be a huge boost for them. I think that's a really good point. Anzio Gibson says, I don't see the season happening this year. I kind of got into this with Mike Griffith on the phone today for our podcast interview a little bit. There's obviously some anxiety creeping in about that, but I mostly believe that the coaches who are speaking about this are speaking from an uninformed perspective. Now, listen, when it comes to the science and the health and what the world's going to look like come July, I am never going to pretend to tell you what that is. I don't know. I have no idea if this is all gone and all done. I don't know. But the thing I'm resting on right now is the fact that it's still kind of a long time away. And I don't think there's much value. And I know a lot of coaches who've been quoted with these sort of doomsday proclamations, or at least hinting at a possible doomsday scenario. I just don't think that's healthy right now. I think that does I think that's the potentially to hurt morale. Right now, we need morale to be high so that we can have additional compliance with what we've been asked to do for the moment, in the hopes that one day things will be better. But if you're pointing to a situation in the fall and saying it's not going to be better then, at a certain point in time, I get worried about maintaining compliance through all of this. So that's probably a bigger issue than I'm capable of solving. But I said this on the video show yesterday. One of the fuels that has aided me in life more than anything else is a sense of optimism, a sense that the world's going to, not that everything's going to be great, not that I always pretend to be happy, but that just things are going to eventually move in a positive direction. And I think in terms of this, I think it's helpful for society to think about it the same way. As a lot of these coaches keep saying, hey, do what you can do now so the fall will be fun. Do what you can do now so the stadiums will be full come September. I think that's probably a pretty helpful message. And as much as I've made fun of some of these coaches for the way in which they've handled their PSAs, I think the overall tone of the message is probably pretty good. By the way, speaking of what happens when these games start being played, Derek Tillman says, I've got Pickens for 1,000 receiving yards for next year. Boy, that's a great thing to be able to think about for sure. By the way, let me kind of roll into our R.S. Andrews cool down. I'll remind you that air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric, R.S. Andrews can do all of those things for us. They do all those things for you. This weekend it's going to be very, very hot, which means that when you turn that air conditioning on, you better hope it works. And if it's not working, that $99 Smiley tune-up. Why do they call it a Smiley tune-up? Because story after story, R.S. Andrews has been delivering smiles, and they can deliver a smile for you, but you got to find them online at rsandrews.com. Huge thanks to my kids for getting that done, by the way. Matt Talley checking in. Good to see you. He wanted to shout out about something. Maybe I missed that. Chris Branham on the subject of running backs. Looking forward to seeing Zeus and Milton and Kenny McIntosh. Yeah, boy, I can't wait to see that. Pete Williams says odds. Who cares about odds? So there you go. Pete Williams says, never tell me the odds. Wasn't a Han Solo line? Never tell me the odds, kid, or something along those lines. Travis Hall says Kirby's been recruiting self-starters. It's a very important phrase. He says, I think our guys are working extra hard during these times. And I think that's probably well said and probably a pretty good thing that self-starters right now, really important. That really does matter, because this, guys will put the Instagram video up of like, hey, I'm in the grind. You got sweat pouring down their face. And, the coaches are able to communicate to the players what they want them to do. But deep down, I know there's some very real anxiety about what's happening when the coaches are not watching, which is most of the time. And as I've said to you before, I believe that what you put into your body right now may be more important than the workout that you're getting. And I mean, I think coaches have some well-placed anxiety because of that. But as our commenter mentioned, as long as you've brought in some guys who have the ability to kind of self-start and kind of get themselves going, then you have a chance of kind of being there for sure, being kind of where you need to be. Let's do one or two more, then we're going to get ready to go. Chad Clark says, which SEC team do you think is the best shape to succeed with less preseason practice? So I think that for a school like Georgia, they're as likely to be the answer to that question as anybody. Now, pretty much everybody thinks their team is sort of more equipped for this for various reasons. My reason for saying Georgia on this is really pretty simple. Somebody mentioned a moment ago that he thinks that Kirby's been recruiting self-starters, and he might. The honest truth is, I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, it's sort of hard to know what's really inside a young man until you're sort of forced to see it come out. My thing on why I think a school like Georgia, or I would even say this about an Alabama as well, maybe even an LSU to a degree also. there's just a very, very high chance that most of the people who return, or I should say not most, a portion of the people who return back to campus are not going to be in great shape. There's just a very good chance that's true. There's just something about having to do all this on your own that is not going to sit well, that's not going to take for a lot of the players who do it, some of the players who do it. So therefore, in a situation like that, it's going to be helpful to have the deepest roster. Ultimately, and I hate to be so simplistic, but it always going to comes down to how many good players do you have on your roster? And if you sacrifice a portion of those because they're not in great shape, then the team with the deepest roster at the beginning is still the deepest roster after a little bit of nutritional and strength and conditioning attrition. You're still going to be better off for that. So the deeper rosters will still be in the better shape. To me, like the game plan and the sort of skull session type stuff, the stuff that happens between your ears, the learning about opposing teams and the learning of your own offense, stuff like that, I think that's probably fairly easy to implement, or at least easier than by comparison than the other thing. But there are going to be some coaches who will be very disappointed, at least a few of their players who don't come back in great shape. And so therefore, if you find yourself in that situation, having a deeper roster will help you mitigate that better. Dean Long says he was worried about the beard to begin with, but it's coming in better now. Yeah, Dean, I appreciate you being able to say that. For sure, for sure. Good to see some good YouTube comments going on here. Thomas Van Santa checking in on everybody. I'm glad to see that. Yeah, it's always a great time for us to check in. John Benton notices that I comb my hair today. Yeah. Some of y'all have been giving me a little bit of, I said before, some of y'all have been body shaming me because I haven't been getting this, I haven't necessarily been looking game ready too much lately. I think some of y'all forgot what I even look like when I do comb my hair. So yeah, there's that. Matt Talley with a little funny Braves line here. Pretty good stuff. All right, we're going to get ready to go here in a minute. And for those of you who are just joining us, I apologize for having to get off here kind of quick. But we got a couple things we got to take care of today, so I got to hop off here a little bit early. We'll try to make it up with more time tomorrow. Let me remind you, the other day we're talking about National Restaurant Takeout Day, and I hopped over to the Marlowe's right here near me in my neighborhood. Got a whole bunch of takeout food. I would show it to you in my refrigerator. The fact is, my garbage disposal of the son has already eaten most of it. So I don't think we have any of that left, but it is a great chance to have some good food brought into the home and also support a restaurant that I love. And it's a great chance to do that as well. By the way, you can also, we talked before about the essential work that's being done in our communities. If you want to say thank you to someone who's doing some essential work, I would say for a healthcare worker, especially right now, a Marlowe's gift card is a great way to do that. And so right now, between now and April 15th, Marlowe's actually adding 20% to your gift card order. You can go to info@marlowestavern.com. That's the email address, info@marlowestavern.com. Find out more about that. Also, I can say this firsthand with my own eyes, eyewitness account of seeing all of this go down, that the folks at Marlowe's were incredible in terms of how clean and how professional they were in delivering the food to me that I bought from them the other day. I can tell you firsthand that no one's out there doing a better job of making sure that to-go orders are served in a sanitary fashion. Marlowe's kind of always had a huge part of its business devoted to those to-go orders anyway, and so that's even more so true now. So support them with some to-go orders, with some gift cards, and they're doing a very generous thing right now for those gift card orders by adding 20% to your purchase. Huge thanks as well to our friends at Meriwether and Tharp for making this possible today. Your source for Georgia divorce, find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. They're taking really good care of you. If you find yourself in the situation of going through divorce, something like that, it's a scary time to be going through, but it can be made less scary when you have a great advocate on your side. That's what we think Meriwether and Tharp is, theatlantadivorceteam.com. Eddie wants me to remind you of our Gator Hater Updater. Been a long time since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. I kind of sift through my graphics here for a moment. Gator Hater Updater, how about 1,244 days? 1,244 days. That's how long it's been since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. 1,244 days. Y'all, we got to get ready to roll out of here for today. Have a good Thursday. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll do a longer string of comments. I will see you here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. We'll look forward to talking to you then.